a hot new show in the Valley Theater scene right now is Selma Arts Center's Next to Normal. This show has gotten a lot of buzz both nationally and locally. And let me introduce my guests. Laramie, do you want to start off?
Sure. My name is Laramie Woolsey, and I'm one of the co-directors and also co-props, co-costumes, and co-set design of the show.
And Nancy.
Oh, I'm Dr. Nancy Doi. I am a psychologist in private practice in Reedley, and I also work out of Adventist Health in Selma.
Okay. So I guess first question, Laramie, there are lots of people who have heard of Next to Normal and maybe even heard one of the songs, but are not all that familiar with what the show is all about. So what do you tell people who are going into this without ever having seen it?
What I like to tell people is Next to Normal is a story of a normal family, the Goodman family, particularly focusing on Diana, the matriarch of the family, who struggles with bipolar depression and delusional episodes that were brought upon by a traumatic event in her life. And it's essentially the story of how all these family members are struggling with their own ability or inability to cope with this mental illness. I think the key thing being here that they're a normal family, because all families experience struggles with mental illness to some degree or another and have to cope with those as well.
And Nancy, you have worked with the cast, is that correct? Just
Yes.
Talking with them about these issues. What has that experience been like?
It is, I went in thinking that I was providing education with regard to bipolar and history and kind of normalizing it a little bit. And the cast actually had quite a bit of their own personal experiences and reasons for why they wanted to do this show. And so I don't know how much I provided with regard to education. If anything, I feel like my job was to help them not personalize it and take it home. My job was to keep them as healthy as I could in the process, and make sure that they did not inhabit their characters so much, because when they were acting part and parcel with their characters, and just to be able to leave that when they went home.
No, Laramie, I saw you shaking your head. It's like, no, she did a lot.
Well, yeah, I think Nancy being part of this production has meant so much to me. One of the first things Nancy did was at our first casting crew meeting, came in and she had like a point by point PowerPoint about like what she read in these characters and what she symptoms she was recognizing in these characters, and explained bipolar depression. And again, she can explain this much more articulately than me. But bipolar depression is kind of like normal people live in this range of emotion, and bipolar depressive people go above and below those normal ranges. And so that was so eye-opening to me, to I've never had it explained that way. And I've actually been medicated for bipolar depression before, and no one had ever explained it to me that way. And it really just, she talked so much about the history, about the illusions in the play to things outside of the play, famous people who've had it before, just reference points for the actors. And I remember when we walked away from that first casting crew meeting, people were like, man, I wish Nancy could have presented even more, but we ran out of time, so I had to cut her short. And so she did an incredible job educating us and allowing us space to ask those questions, to learn more about bipolar depression. And I think that's what created the foundation for the actors to feel like they could share with her about their personal connections and why they wanted to do the show. So Nancy's just been invaluable to us.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you.
I'm really intrigued by this idea that actors inhabit this other body when they go on stage. And I guess this would be true of any show, right? It doesn't have to be specifically about mental illness. Can you talk a little bit about this sort of concept and how that could actually be helpful to somebody who is experiencing mental illness?
I think that acting can be an incredible experience and let us walk in the world in a way that we're not used to, and that can widen our perspectives in some really powerful ways.
You mentioned, Nancy, a researcher, Bessel van der
Kolk, yes.
Tell us about him and what you kind of gleaned from from his research?
Okay, so when I went through graduate school many years ago, the idea of psychotherapy was very much what we call top down, where we're changing thoughts, where we're looking at how the mind influences our behaviors. But what Bessel van der Kolk did in his research examined how our bodies are reacting to trauma and how neurological systems are activated as a result. And by doing that, he proposed that we turn off these neurological systems through physical actions. So he proposed yoga, and it was through him, I think, we discovered about what's called the vagus nerve, which shuts down the fight or flight system that occurs, which is very instantaneous. Boom, here it is. And he did MRIs that showed that when some people had the fight or flight system on, either everything was lighting up in their brain or nothing was lighting up in their brains. And either one made it difficult for us to think about, okay, I'm in a triggering situation. What do I do now? What am I supposed to think? What did my therapist tell me? And it was so hard for people to bring that forward because the brain was either firing too high or too low. And so he proposed physical things that we do, like yoga and like brushing is a vagus nerve kind of a thing, breathing, that deep breath, that would help calm down that fight or flight system and help you then bring out the cognitive abilities to, okay, this is what I can do, and these are some ways I can think about this differently.
Now, Laramie, I know that it was important to you for this production to use kind of a non-traditional casting method, and I know that you and your co-director Jessica Meredith, that was one of your goals. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I've seen this cast is it's always based on who looks like who. And in such a diverse community, like our valley is so diverse, it doesn't make sense to cast people, to me, based on, oh, well, this person looks like this person, so they're in. It felt more important to us to represent our community in this show that talks about mental health by casting a diverse cast. And my co-director specifically, she is Black and wanted to represent the Black experience and how she felt growing up, about how she couldn't talk about mental health. And it was kind of like you had to just pray about it and hope it goes away. And so we felt like it was really important to cast a diverse cast so that they could represent these people in the Valley and all these different experiences with mental health, so that we could open up conversations for all the different types of people who come to see this show. We need representation on stage. People need to feel seen, heard, and understood. And I think that was our main goal for this show, was to create something where people could connect and see themselves in the characters and start to do their own work to heal and process their grief.
One of the things that I think is really intriguing about Next to Normal is its specificity in terms of talking about mental illness. They get down to the nitty-gritty of talking about the different kinds of drugs that are used, the different kinds of therapies that are used, and that includes pharmaceuticals, it includes electroshock. Laramie, could you talk a little bit about that sort of specificity?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting. And while mental health care needs to exist, and we do need treatment like medications in some cases, like talk therapy in some cases, maybe even in extreme cases, treatments like electroconvulsive shock therapy. But what I think the show actually should open more conversation about is less about like the specificity of how it's treated, but more like the general, how is mental health treated? How is mental health stigmatized? There, to me, seem to be characters that represent the ways that society tends to deal with mental health and its stigma. There's a character who just throws pills at it, throws pills at it, throws pills at it, and fails to recognize the emotional side of it. And I think that that's representative of how there's a lot of people who would rather brush it under the rug and pretend that mental health is just a personal problem and that, just buck up, buttercup kind of a thing. And then I think that there are also extremists who want to jump to the most intense thing possible. So I think that this show opens up conversation for, yes, like what types of medications or treatments are there, but more importantly, how we treat mental illness and its stigma as a society.
Yeah, for treatment, one of the things that is really missing, and something that I really feel strongly about, is the inability to treat the family. A lot of times insurance companies will not pay for family treatment, so family treatment doesn't occur. Sometimes I have to sneak family treatment in, and this is a family that I really think could have benefited from family treatment, everybody in the same room at the same time. And unfortunately, treatment is so limited. If I were to hospitalize, they get 3 days and that's it. What it would be nice to have is a place for hospitalization. I think about Sylvia Plath and the bell jar, the way it used to be. You know, she was playing badminton in a beautiful lawn forested, space, and it was like camp, but it allowed for some different processing, rather than you've got 3 days, we'll throw some medication at you, don't kill yourself, and then you're off and you get yourself some individual therapy. So it would be nice for us to have more treatment options. And unfortunately, if it's not getting paid for, a lot of times those treatment options are not there. And the other piece I was thinking is I would love to be able to possibly develop my own drama/trauma, treatment, but I probably would end up doing it on my own dime, and just because I love it and because I think it would be helpful for a lot of the kids. So
I have to ask what has become kind of the inevitable question this year, pre-COVID versus post-COVID. Do you think, Laramie, that Next to Normal plays differently because of the pandemic?
That's actually a really interesting question. I think that, like, in the COVID world, post-COVID world, I think that people are generally a little more open to the mental health conversation. I think a lot of people who maybe hadn't experienced mental health like crises like some of us do regularly got a taste of it during COVID, because it was a hard time for everybody. So I think that conversation is a little more open to people. I definitely think there are still people who aren't willing to participate in that conversation, but I do think it's more open. It's interesting that you asked that. We didn't particularly stage it in a way to like comment on post-COVID mental health, but I do really hope that when people hear that this show is about mental health and mental illnesses, that in a post-COVID world, they're not automatically dismissing it and go, that's not something I'm interested in. In fact, I hope they go, oh, wow, like that's something, that I experienced during COVID, and I would be interested in looking into that and hearing about it, because that's our whole goal, is just starting these conversations, and that can't happen if people don't, want to participate.
I think about post-COVID versus pre-COVID in that it feels like the edge of especially self-harm and anxiety and things my kids are coming in, it's like, I just can't do this anymore. Whereas before it was maybe a football length away, and it took a lot more to push them towards that edge. That edge feels a little bit closer, maybe at the 50-yard line or the 25-yard line now. I feel like there's less wiggle room post-COVID. And so trying to build up that stamina and that endurance to go back into the social arena, to be able to deal with, and I don't know if it's post-COVID per se, but it feels like world events are also, contributing to that edge feeling a little bit closer overall.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, Laramie, is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't yet covered on this topic? I could probably sit here for another couple hours to talk about this with you.
I was going to say, I think there's so much to go into with this show, just about how important it is for our community, how much we have to offer with this production. I think it's just really exciting. The cast we have is incredible. We have a live band. We will be having a talk back with our mental health professional tomorrow night after the show, to, again, just provide a platform to facilitate these types of conversations. And I think that you know, if people come and see the show and that helps them at all to start having these conversations, start, you know, helping themselves. Because I know for me, starting therapy and starting treatment regards to my mental health was like very, very difficult because it was so stigmatized, and I felt like I wasn't a strong enough person if I needed that help, or I wasn't a good enough person if I needed that help. And that's not true. And I think that if people can come see this show and recognize themselves in the characters and recognize that it actually takes a really strong person to be able to address these issues in their life and take care of themselves, then I think that that's the most we can ask for. I would love for people to have that opportunity to see themselves in these characters and take positive steps forward. So
Nancy, is there anything like you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think the thing I want to say about the show is that this show is very much, when you talk about it the way we're talking about it, it sounds so serious, and I think I would be reluctant, like, oh, more work kind of a thing.
yeah,
But it really is medicine going down with a spoonful full of sugar. The performances, the music, the story is phenomenal, and it is entertaining and interesting, and it is not like being hit upside the head with these are the problems with mental illness, or this is just um such a difficult experience for this family. It is performed with care and kindness and love and beautiful music. And so if you get a chance to come in, you will be, I think, just filled with so much amazement and music and wonderful entertainment on top of increased knowledge and awareness.
Yeah, and I'll just throw in my 2 cents on that topic. The music in the show is gorgeous,
Yes.
and that's what drew me first to this show, was listening to the cast album and realizing, wow, these songs are amazing. Then you also get to meet this family that is so indelibly presented. I mean, these characters are all so full and rich, and yeah, it's a great experience. And Laramie, just remind us, how long does the show play for?
we run through May 27th. We'll have shows Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night, and then we have matinees on Saturdays and Sundays.
Okay, and it's one of those things that you can't postpone, you can't procrastinate.
Nope.
This particular show will never be done again in this exact form, and so in order to catch it, it's not like streaming TV. You just can't come on and do it whenever.
Oh yeah, and another piece for me is, as a mom of a teenage daughter, I get this. There's whoever wrote this was spot on with how the mom felt and how the teenager feels.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for taking the time today.